It was the quietest hour of the morning when the baby's cries pierced the air, an echoing wail that carried across the empty cobblestone streets of Willow Hollow. In the shadow of the old church, a wicker basket lay on the frostbitten steps, lined with a thin blanket, and a hastily written note pinned to its edge. "Her name is Grace. Please give her a chance." For hours, no one stirred. The village was small, and the few who lived there were tucked in their beds, oblivious to the sound that grew weaker with each passing minute. It wasn't until old Martha Reed, the church caretaker, made her way to light the morning candles that the child was discovered. "What in heaven's name?" Martha whispered as she knelt by the basket. The baby's cheeks were red and raw from the cold, her tiny fists clenched in protest against the biting air. Without hesitation, Martha scooped her up, cradling the fragile bundle close to her chest. The note fluttered to the ground, forgotten for the moment. Near the altar, and inspected her more closely. The child couldn't have been more than a few days old. She had a shock of dark hair and wide, searching eyes. Her cries had subsided into soft whimpers, and when Martha offered her a finger, Grace clung to it with surprising strength. News of the abandoned baby spread quickly. In a town as small as Willow Hollow, every story became everyone's business. Some whispered about who the mother might be, a wandering traveler, perhaps, or someone from the village who had hidden their pregnancy. Others speculated darkly about why the child had been left behind. Martha, a widow with no children of her own, decided to keep Grace, at least for the time being. No child should grow up unloved, she declared firmly to the curious townsfolk. Though she was in her 60s and lived on a modest income, she resolved to give Grace as much love and care as she could muster. It wasn't easy. The baby was often sick, her cries piercing the night as Martha rocked her by the fire. The midwife, Agnes, visited frequently, offering advice and herbal remedies. "She's a fighter," Agnes said one evening, watching Grace clutch at Martha's shawl. "She's got the will to live." The villagers, too, began to rally around Martha and the baby. They brought jars of goat's milk, hand-knitted blankets, and tiny clothes sewn from scraps. Even gruff old Mr. Potter, the blacksmith, fashioned a delicate iron cradle for Grace, which he delivered with a grumbled, "Don't go expecting more gifts, now." By the time Grace turned 1, she was no longer a mystery, but a beloved part of the community. She had grown into a lively child with bright eyes and an infectious laugh. She toddled around the churchyard, chasing butterflies and picking wildflowers, her small hands always covered in dirt. Martha officially adopted her, and the village celebrated with a small gathering in the church hall. Someone baked a cake, and Mrs. Abernathy played the piano. Grace, oblivious to the significance of the day, spent most of the time trying to grab the candles on the cake, much to everyone's amusement. "Do you think she'll want to know someday?" Agnes asked Martha, as they watched the child play. "About where she came from, I mean." Martha sighed, her gaze softening. "Maybe. And when that day comes, I'll tell her what little I know. But for now, she's mine, and that's all that matters." By the time Grace was 7, the questions began. It started innocently enough, Grace asking why her hair was darker than Martha's, or why she didn't have a father like some of the other children in the village. Martha answered as best she could. "Families come in all shapes and sizes," she said one evening, as she braided Grace's hair by the fire. "And ours is special because we chose each other. But where did I come from before you found me?" Grace persisted, her brow furrowed. Martha hesitated. "You were left at the church, my love. I don't know who your mother was, but she must have loved you very much to want you to have a better life." The answer satisfied Grace for a time, but as she grew older, the curiosity gnawed at her. She began to imagine who her mother might have been, a princess forced to give her up, a brave traveler, who had to leave her behind to keep her safe. Each story she concocted was more fantastical than the last, but deep down, a part of her longed for the truth. When Grace turned 13, a woman arrived in Willow Hollow. She was gaunt and weathered, her clothes patched and her hair streaked with grey. She lingered near the edges of the village, avoiding the main square, but asking quiet questions in the tavern and at the market. It wasn't long before word reached Martha. "She's looking for a child," Agnes told her one afternoon. "Says she left her in a village years ago." Could it be? Martha's heart sank. She had always known this day might come, but she wasn't ready. Grace was her daughter now, her heart and soul. The thought of losing her was unbearable. That evening, the woman came to the church. Martha recognized her immediately. The resemblance to Grace was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same determined eyes. "I'm Mary," the woman said, her voice trembling. I think the child you've been raising might be mine." Martha didn't deny it. Instead, she invited Mary inside, offering her a seat by the fire. For hours, the two women talked. Mary told her story of poverty, desperation, and the heartbreaking decision to leave Grace behind. "I thought she'd be better off without me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But I've regretted it every day since." Martha listened, her emotions a whirlwind of empathy, anger, and fear. When Mary finally asked to see Grace, Martha hesitated. "She's happy here," she said softly. "I won't let anything disrupt her life." "I don't want to take her away," Mary said quickly. I just want her to know me." The next morning, Martha told Grace about Mary. The girl sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap as she absorbed the news. "She's my real mother?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She gave birth to you," Martha said gently. "But being a mother is about more than that. I've raised you, and I'll always be your mother, no matter what." Grace nodded slowly. "Can I meet her?" The meeting took place in the churchyard, under the shade of the old oak tree. Mary knelt before Grace, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch her daughter's face. "You're so beautiful," she murmured. "So strong." Grace studied her for a long moment before stepping forward and wrapping her arms around her. It was a tentative embrace, but it spoke volumes. Over the weeks that followed, Mary became a quiet presence in Grace's life. She stayed in the village, taking odd jobs and visiting the church often. At first, Grace was wary, but gradually, she began to open up. She showed Mary her favorite spots in the village, introduced her to the stray cat she'd been feeding, and even let her braid her hair. Martha watched from a distance, her heart aching with both pride and sadness. She had given Grace the foundation to grow, and now she had to let her explore this new connection. In the end, Mary decided not to stay in Willow Hollow. "I don't want to confuse her," she told Martha. "She has a good life here, with you. But I'll visit, if that's all right." Martha agreed, though her heart ached at the thought of Grace having to say goodbye. On the day Mary left, Grace hugged her tightly and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." Time lapse, Grace growing older, her silhouette framed by the church windows as she studies late into the night. Medium shot, Grace leaving the village, her packed bag slung over her shoulder, as Martha waves from the church steps. A bustling city hospital, where Grace, now a young woman, cares for a patient with calm determination. Grace walking back into Willow Hollow, now a woman, her steps purposeful, as she nears the church. Martha's tear-filled eyes as she sees Grace return. Grace embracing Martha tightly, their bond as strong as ever. Grace lighting a candle at the church altar, the same place she was once left as a baby. Grace kneeling by her old iron cradle, her fingers brushing its rusted edges with a smile of nostalgia. The churchyard in full bloom, Grace and Martha walking hand in hand under the oak tree. Grace sitting by the church window at sunset, writing a letter, her silhouette framed by golden light. A framed picture of Grace, Martha, and Mary together on the church mantel, symbolizing the family they've built.